Hello and welcome to the full 10 yards with me, Tim Monk. I will be your host. Welcome one and all to this new podcast for you NFL fans out there, coming to you from the UK. And we're going to look at the AFC South. Before we get started, just a bit about myself. You can get me on Twitter at full 10 yards. I'm not familiar with the podcast world, so take it easy on me. It's just something that I wanted to get into, see where this crazy journey goes, and hopefully entertain you guys for half hour on these podcasts. So thanks again for joining me. And as I said, we're going to be looking at the AFC South today. We're going to be looking at Indianapolis, Jacksonville, Houston, and Tennessee. So, let's start off then with your AFC South champions from last year, the Houston Texans, 9-7. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to be looking at the teams, what happened last year, what's gone on in the off-season, what we can expect next season going forward, and tie that in with your fantasy football, who you want to be drafting, where they're going to be going, who you want to be avoiding and letting other people draft, and who you want to reach for in your drafts. So let's start with champions. Defending champions, Houston Texans, 9-7 last year. God knows how they got there with Brock Osweiler as their quarterback. I think you can expect them to regress this year. Brock Osweiler has gone to the Browns to then be given to the dumpsters at some point. Your QBs at Houston this year will be Tom Savage and Deshaun Watson, the rookie, who's the 12th pick by Houston. I think at some point during the season, Deshaun Watson will probably come in. Tom Savage will probably get the starting job first. But from certainly from a fantasy perspective, you don't not want to be drafting these guys. Even in two QB leagues, these are going to be coming last off the board. So we have at running back, we have Lamar Miller, who was your running back 18 last year. 1,073 yards, 1 reception TD and 5 rushing TDs. He was a bit banged up towards the end of last season, but for most he would have been a first round pick, including myself. I was quite high on him, and it turns out I must have been quite high myself when I was picking him. As he did pretty much disappoint and not put up great numbers. I think this year he'll probably go in similar position, I suppose, middle of round 2, start round 2 in deeper leagues. But I can't see him putting up running back 1 numbers this season. He'll certainly get the volume. And I think it will with the Tom Savage and Deshaun Watson at quarterback, you're going to be getting a run-heavy offense, especially with defense. JJ Watt and Jadavon Clowney, I think they're going to rely on and lean on the defense quite a lot to keep them in the games and just try and run the clock down, similar to what Dallas do. But unfortunately, they'll have Lamar Miller. So wide receiver, obviously you have DeAndre Hopkins, who was very much a disappointment last year compared with his 2015 year. 2015 he had over 1,500 yards and 11 touchdowns, whereas last year just the 954 yards and 4 touchdowns to his name. From a fantasy perspective, his best score was 17.3 points. That's standard scoring. He was in the top 20 of wide receivers 4 times in 2016. So again, many people putting the first or second round pick in DeAndre Hopkins would have been disappointed week to week, as there was 6 games out of 16 last year where he had less than 5 fantasy points. So going into 2017, what can we expect from Miller and Hopkins? I think pretty much the same. Nothing stellar or ceiling bursting, but you're going to get weeks where there's going to be very low fantasy points because the output from this offense is going to be low, and that stems from Tom Savage and Deshaun Watson at quarterback. So unless these guys have fallen to you a round or 2 later than their average draft position, I don't think I'd be wanting to draft these. And certainly their tight end CJ Fodorich again possibly could have some value in as a late round flyer, because the QBs there may use him as a security blanket. But again, in your drafts, if you're going to leave your tight ends or QBs late, Fodorich is maybe a tight end you want to be picking up towards the end of your drafts. So predictions for Houston this year. I mean, again, I can't see them winning the division. I think they will regress. I think they'll end up around 6 wins, 6-10. And again, I think that's where they should have probably been last season. I'm not quite sure how they pulled out some wins. And again, yeah, I think I can see them finishing third. So if we now move on to the Tennessee Titans. Now, some big hype around the Titans this season. I think it's a very big season for the Titans. They signed Eric Decker in the off season. They were 9-7 last year, same as Houston. And I think they'll go the same again this season, 9-7, maybe 10-6. If Mariota takes a step forward. Mariota is coming off a right fibula injury from last season, has been participating full participation in OTAs, and is said to be looking good. I think now that he has another weapon in Eric Decker around him, I think that this offense will take another step forward. And I see Tennessee winning the division this year. They open up versus the Raiders, then they are at the Jaguars, versus the Seahawks, and at the Texans. So I think the most important thing for Tennessee is to get off to a good start. Certainly those 4 games, you want to be at least having 2 coming out level. You never know, they might upset the Raiders a little bit at home. And certainly, if they want to be going to the postseason, maybe 3-1 is what they want to be coming out of the first 4 games there to get on a roll and be hard to peg back. I think with the AFC South, it's going to be quite interesting, as it would come down to the divisional games, because these all 4 of these teams, well, maybe not Jacksonville, but they're all quite close in talent. The players that they have at the different skill positions. I think with the AFC South, it's all about momentum. Tennessee certainly have all the cogs in place for them to get on a roll and visit the postseason. They certainly have a really good offensive line, which helps. They had such a good run game last season, and with Decker there now, I think that it's going to be a nightmare for defences to try and match up against them. So let's go to their running backs. DeMarco Murray was your running back 5 last year in terms of fantasy. He had 1,287 yards, 9 touchdowns. He was in the top 10 of running backs for 9 weeks or more, and he would have been your fantasy player that would have won you your titles last year, as he had, as you say, 9 weeks where he was in the top 10 of running backs for fantasy, and he was going quite late in rounds in drafts last year. He certainly won't be this year. He had also, on top of his 9 rushing TDs, 3 receiving TDs, and another 377 yards. So he was an absolute powerhouse for fantasy owners last year. And again, I think it'll be pretty much the same. And if anything, it would be helped by the signing of Decker, as Decker will slot in there, pun intended. Although he may take some targets away from where they may have rushed last year for a touchdown, but we shall see. And moving on to Eric Decker, he was injured for most of last year, signed from the Jets, and he is a great red zone target for the Titans, and another weapon for the defenses in the AFC South to worry about. They also signed Corey Davis in the off-season, rookie. He can play all over. He's mainly an X receiver. I think he'll come in and slot in as the wide receiver number 2 there behind Decker. And unfortunately, I think this all culminates in meaning that Rashard Matthews who was your wide receiver 18 last year, with 9 touchdowns and 945 yards. He was an absolute machine some weeks. I think you'll see him go back to lesser numbers this year, where he should be. Someone's got to regress in this offense, I think, with Decker being signed. Of course, you have Delaney Walker, tight end, who's now 33 years young. In August, he was your tight end 5 last year. He's a bit of a boom and bust tight end for fantasy, but he's a very good and important piece of that offense. Reliable tight end for Marcus Mariota. I think from a fantasy perspective, you're going to be taking Mariota probably a bit earlier than you would have been last year. There is a bit of hype, him and Jameis Winston, who we'll get onto in a future episode. But certainly, if you're not too sure of what pieces of offense to take from Tennessee in your drafts, whether it be Decker, Walker, or DeMarco Murray, maybe take Mariota, because you might get all 3 funneled into Mariota, and you could see him putting some decent scores up this year. And I think you can certainly expect him to improve on his 26 touchdowns and 9 interceptions from last year. 9 interceptions was actually pretty decent. I wouldn't be surprised if that stays the same. I think Tennessee will win the division this year. And I think I can't see, out of all the teams, I can see Indy. Let's move on to Indianapolis. Will be the next team. I think they'll be roughly around where they were last year, about 8-8. Andrew Luck and the Colts will open up versus the Rams at the Rams, versus Cardinals, versus the Browns, and at Seahawks, and versus the 49ers. So they're going to get a big taste of the NFC West first 5 weeks of the season, plus the Browns, and certainly from the Colts, and all you Colts fans out there will be wanting at least 3 wins, maybe even 4 from those, to keep pace with Tennessee. Andrew Luck, he had a good season last year from a fantasy perspective. He was the QB4 despite that terrible offensive line that they had. He threw for 31 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, had 6 fumbles, threw for 4,240 yards. He was one of your top 12 QBs 11 of 15 weeks, and there was 3 weeks where he was the highest scoring quarterback in fantasy last year. I think he was banged up for a little bit. He was playing with some injuries towards the back end of that as well. So hopefully, I think he had some shoulder surgery. I think it was a labrum. So hopefully that will heal up and he'll be back in time for camp, and hopefully come back healthy, raring to go. Because let's be honest, he's one of the best quarterbacks around. He's only been around for a couple of years, but you can tell the amount of talent the guy has. And let's just hope that their offensive line helps him out a little bit more, so that people like Hilton and Moncrief, Kamar Aiken, who they've signed in the off-season, Philip Dorsett, are able to get some more targets. So let's move on to running back for Indy, is Old Man Gore, as I like to call him. 13th year now for Frank Gore, and he's what a running back. He was going late in drafts last year as well, and probably will do this year, but he was your running back 12 last year, had 250 rushes, 30 receptions, had 4 TDs, both on the ground and rushing, which was a bit surprising, but again, they had a horrible offensive line, so that could be a reason why he had as many receiving touchdowns as he did rushing. He had 10 games of 10 plus fantasy points and 1 game of less than 5. So for a guy you're going to be drafting as your running back 2, maybe your flex or your running back 3, that's a decent return for someone you can get on in the later rounds. And certainly if your draft strategy is to start off wide receiver, or tight end or a high end QB, Gore is going to be a guy you are going to be targeting, perhaps reaching for if gets to the later rounds and you've only got 1 or 2. Moving on to the wide receivers over in Indianapolis, you've got T.Y. Hilton, who was your wide receiver 5 last year. He was pretty much boom or bust, as he had quite a few bad weeks against the better defenses, and again the better teams that he did they did poorly against Indianapolis last year with a good teams with a good pass rushers. So your Denvers, your Houstons, your Kansas City, and your Minnesota. They were the weeks where Hilton was struggling, and it's purely because the offensive line was terrible when Luck didn't have as much time to be able to let Hilton run his routes and give him the ball. So hopefully again, they fixed up the offensive line there, and Hilton will provide you with wide receiver one numbers week to week, but just do be careful. Also, some weeks that it won't be there. I mean, they open it, so again, a good test will be for them is they're at the Rams and at the Seahawks, and certainly in the Seahawks and the Cardinals as well. They have good corners there, and good defenses. So it'd be a good test for their offensive line, and to see if Luck and the Colts have stepped forward any amounts from last year. I think Moncrief, the second wide receiver over there, he was injured for most of the season last year, probably about half, I think, but he still managed to clock 9 games for 7 touchdowns and 307 yards, which is not a bad return. But from a fantasy perspective, there's not many people that would have been starting the guy. And going into this season, I don't think that's going to change much. So at the tight end position, you've also got Jack Doyle. Dwayne Allen has left Indianapolis, and Jack Doyle, I think, should see an increase on what he had last year. He had 5 touchdowns, 584 yards. He was the tight end 13, which I think shows what the tight end position is all about for fantasy. People like Doyle, you're going to be streaming those, or he's got a guy you're going to be targeting towards the back end of the draft, because you don't get a Travis Kelce, you're not getting a Jimmy Graham in those earlier rounds. He again, pretty much like Moncrief and Hilton at times, it's very much boom or bust for Indianapolis, and I think that's what their season will be like again this season. And I can see them getting at least 8 wins, 8-8 probably, maybe 9-7. I'll be slightly surprised if they get to 10 or 11. But yeah, with Andrew Luck at quarterback, I think as long as they've fixed a few bits in that offensive line and Gore doesn't break down, as long as he stays healthy, I think he's an important cog in that offense, because he's able to catch passes out of the backfield and dump it off when the pass rush is getting to Andrew Luck. But yeah, I don't think they're quite there yet for going deep in the postseason, but we shall see. So that leaves us with your Jacksonville Jaguars. They were pretty terrible last year. I must admit, I was very high on them. Reports coming out that last season where defense has improved, and which is similar to this season. A lot of people around the NFL, how should we say it, touting them to have a really good defense this year. But until I see it, I don't really want to believe it, if I'm honest. The one's light at the end of the tunnel for Jacksonville is they have a new head coach in Doug Marrone. He was brought in towards the end of last season for the last 2 games, where they showed some improvement. They narrowly lost to Indianapolis, and they absolutely smashed the Titans. Doug Marrone's been brought in. He was the former offensive coordinator for the Saints and the Bills head coach over the past couple of years. Who, for the Saints, he was a heavy passing offense, and he never had an offense that was lower than 4th in pass attempts. Then when he went to the Bills, he's flipped that over, and they led the league in rushing attempts and second in rushing yardage. I think it's 2013, 2014 when they had Fred Jackson and CJ Spiller. God bless him. And they also have a new offensive coordinator, Nathaniel Hackett, who was the Buffalo offensive coordinator for Doug Marrone in those 2 years that led the league in rush attempts and second in rush yardage. So I think you can expect, certainly in my opinion, a more heavier rush attack this year. It didn't quite work out for them last year. And I think teams will predict that the majority of their plays will be runs, purely because of Blake Bortles. There's reports coming out of camp that Blake Bortles is has changed his mechanics, which is good for him and everyone. But unless his shoulder's been separated and a new bionic arm been put in, I don't think until we see it in action on the field that he's turned a corner. I'm not going to be investing any time in that guy, and I certainly think that they'll run the ball a lot more. Blake Bortles had only 5 games last season where he didn't throw an interception or fumbled the ball, which is just awful. Put me in that backfield and let me just hand the ball off to Fournette, to be honest. Moving on to Fournette, obviously the rookie pick from this year's draft. I think he'll get a hell of a workload. He's going quite high in drafts, especially when you think teams are going to be packing the box against Jacksonville and trying to force Bortles to throw, which seems to work for them, for the other teams anyway. I think Fournette again will be similar to Lamar Miller. I'm not quite sure obviously what his production is going to be like, but people are going to be investing 2nd and 3rd round picks in the guy. So good luck to you, but I'm going to let other people draft him. Wide receiver, you've got Allen Robinson. Who's a very talented wide receiver, but last year struggled a little bit, but that's more because of Blake Bortles and the offense in general. And he was your wide receiver 25, 883 yards, 6 touchdowns, which isn't too bad considering. But I think this season, what you're going to get out of Allen Robinson this season, I think you'll probably get a bit better. And again, he's not a person I'm necessarily going to be reaching for in drafts, because he always he's not going to put up stellar numbers every week. So I think he's your wide receiver. He's the 2nd wide receiver you want to be taking for your fantasy teams. Certainly, I think you're living in dangerously if he's going to be your number 1. And again, for defense, I don't ever condone picking a Jaguars defense for your fantasy teams, but it might be worth a stash. If they hit the ground running, they on paper they're very talented. But again, you're picking a Jags defense here, so you're playing with fire, to be quite honest. I think they'll improve a little bit from last season. Let's say they were 3-13 last season, but I think they tanked a lot of that. I can certainly see them getting to 5 wins, but I don't think their time's yet. I don't think their time will be in my lifetime. So Jacksonville are Jacksonville. I look forward to not watching them when they come over this year. So that's the AFC South. Again, I hope you enjoyed my preview. Love to get your thoughts. If you want to hit us up on at full 10 yards on Twitter. Certainly any feedback for the pod would be very grateful. And hopefully, as the weeks go by, get a bit more comfortable with the podcast and the setup, and hopefully we get a few guests on, and hopefully we'll get a bit of merchandise out. And get a few guests on, do a few competitions, and certainly look to progress. So again, feedback would be very welcome. Thank you so much for listening. You have gone the full 10 yards today. Next time we will look at the AFC West, where we will break that division down team by team, look at the fantasy players, and look at what their prospects are for next season. So thank you very much for joining me, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye bye.